Hello and welcome to IETF 111 Netmod Working Group Online. I appreciate everyone being here in whatever time zone you're in and whatever position that may or may not impose. I'm Lou Berger. I'm here with my co-chairs Kent Watson and Joel Jegley. And if you're listening to us, obviously you've found the right place, well, hopefully. Next slide, please. As an IETF meeting, we are covered by a certain code of conduct as well as policies related to our contributions to the IETF, and all activity here is being recorded and becomes part of our public record. I hope you're familiar with the note well. If you're not, take a look at these slides, and even better, take a look at the link at the bottom of the page, ietf.org, about note well, HTML. That really will go into all the policies and procedures related to conduct and the disclosure for the IETF. Next. So we're here again on Meet Echo. We are using integrated chat and Jabber. There's a nice pop-out feature if you like that. Blue sheets are automatic, so you don't have to do anything for that if you're part of Meet Echo. We're using the CodeMD minute taking. There's a link right at the start of the chat if you want an easy way to find it. That also has links to the meeting materials and all the other session related links. Please go to the CodeMD to help capture comments that are being made, and also that the comments you make are appropriately captured. I'm being told I have some audio problems. Hopefully this corrects it. I'm not sure what's going on, but if it's not adequate, we can switch to one of my co-chairs jumping in. Next. Our agenda, it is not overly tight, but we do only have 1 hour. I am sure we will feel tight that we're running late at the end. We do have a countdown timer that we're going to try to use this session. For the chartered items for that 30-minute block, we're actually just going to put up as much time as left for that group, and they can divide among themselves. And we have one non-chartered item. Next, please. Oh, right, document update. So we don't have any RFCs recently published. Of course, we like seeing things published because that means we've done our job, because that's what we're here for. We do have one document that was returned from the editor queue to the working group. Kent is the shepherd. Basically, that document was put forward a long time ago, and it was waiting on a reference, and that the document that it was referring to changed. And because of that change, it needs to come back, and the document needs to be aligned with that reference. Of course, that's why it was sitting in misref. These things do happen occasionally. So we'll come back and hopefully have energy to complete that document. We do have several documents that went to the ISG for publication, and the only one that really is interesting there is I want to point out to the NMDA diff authors that we're waiting on a comment back from you, or an update from you. I see Alex is in queue. Go ahead, Alex.
I just we just submitted revision 11, so hopefully this takes care of the action item. I don't know if anything else would be required.
That's great. If you didn't send a list explicitly saying that the action item has been addressed, please do so. I'm actually.
All right. Okay. I have not sent a message to the larger list, but I will do that.
It's best to go to the person who raised the issue. Joel's the shepherd. He may know off the top of his head who raised that issue. I don't remember, quite honestly. But it's good to go back to the person who raised the issue and say that you've addressed their comments, and please go ahead and clear your discuss. Usually there's a discuss associated with it.
Okay, great. Thanks. I'll do that.
We do have a couple of documents that are post last call, and I see Rob in queue, and I'd love to hear from him. Please go ahead, Rob.
So just on the NMDA diff draft, I think that's post ISG review, and it looks like there's no discuss is blocking. It's just the comments that have been raised, no objection comments. So if they've all been addressed, I can check the document, and then I think that can go forward.
That's great. So it sounds like a mail isn't even needed. You can just go cover that. So really appreciate it. Do you want to comment on the post last call documents?
Yes. So they're both awaiting me to update, and I still struggle to find the time to do it. In particular, the 7-phase VLAN model. I have had further comments from IEEE on what I need to do resolve. I can't remember if that was before the last IETF or not, but I just need to update those and resolve that with them. If I still struggle to get there, I have had the offer of another person joining to help push this through the last part of the process. So I may take them up on that if I can't find the time. Can't manage to do it. So apologies for that. I know it's waiting on me.
No worries. We understand the workload. You might want to consider taking that person up on their added help, just because
Yes.
you do have to go through the whole ISG process, and you know that there's going to be more revisions needed.
And I can also give a quick update on the other two drafts there. So the geolocation document, that one's got discuss on there from Ben Kaduk. I've chatted with him yesterday about his discuss, and I think he's planning to send some proposed text, hopefully to resolve that with Chris. It might be the other thing to do, Chris, is if you are able to meet up in gather.town at some point with Ben, maybe we can resolve it verbally to work out what the next step is to clear that discuss. And then the Yang instance file format one, that's had a comment, I think, from Andy Bierman that we need to resolve, and hopefully that shouldn't be too tricky, and then I can take that on to the ISG, or IETF Law School.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate, obviously, all your efforts on shepherding our documents through the ISG process.
No problems.
Next slide. We've had no incoming liaisons or communications. As always, we ask if there's anything that's needed. That to be discussed during the meeting was a holdover that should have been deleted. My bad. Apologies on that. Next slide. So we continue to work remote. We want to remind everyone that our mailing list is where we gauge consensus. It's very important that any results from private meetings, as well as even this meeting, that we take those discussions to the working group to confirm the results and to confirm any changes that are going on in working group documents or working group topics. We do want to remind everyone that we can have virtual meetings, both informal and formal. All it takes is a request to us, the chairs, and we will set it up. And hopefully, we've been responsive on that. The versioning topic continues to be a hot item and substantial work. If there's reasons to ask for an interim there, we look to the authors to do that, or even working group participants. But that's something just to keep in mind. Next. Thought I had one more, but I guess this is the last one. Yeah, I thought there was one more, but I'm obviously confused. So with that
appears to be the end of the presentation.
Our agenda. The versioning update is first. Jason, I believe you're up with the overview.
Okay. Let me know you guys can hear me. My audio's coming through okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay. So I'm doing kind of an update on a general update on the versioning work. I guess as far as I guess maybe a question for the chairs before I get in too far here. Who's going to manage the queue of questions? Is that something I should keep an eye on, or are the chairs going to manage the queue?
Either way, Jason. Whatever makes sense.
Okay. maybe to start, I'll let you guys manage it, and feel free to jump in when you think, like, just interrupt me when you think it's needed at any time. I'll try to pause and see if there's anything in the queue as I go along as well. Okay.
Any questions as people show up, or do you want to take it at the end of each section? That's really
I think we could probably take them as we go, and if it becomes too much, we can defer some of them. So let's just go as they come up for now. Okay, next slide, please. So there's 3 presentations going to occur on the versioning work. I'm going to give an overview. That's this presentation. And then the next ones, we're going to give a specific update on the module versioning draft. I'll do that one. And then Joe's going to give an update on the Yang Semver draft. Next slide, please. The next bunch of slides are just kind of a review for people to remember what's going on with all the versioning. We're kind of we're focused on 5 main drafts that are part of the work that we kind of target to bring all these to RFC eventually. The first 2 are the ones we've been most focused on for the last while, trying to get those ready for working group last call. But there's been some work on the other drafts as well. So the first draft here is kind of the basics of module revision handling. This is where we allow authors to notify users of a module that there's been a non-backwards compatible change. The second draft is kind of an alternative way of indicating a Yang revision rather than just using a revision date. There's kind of a Semver-like label, so you can have a major, minor editorial version. And then packages basically allows you to specify kind of a collection of modules that form a schema, and a server can advertise an entire package saying, I support this package with all these different, with a specific list of modules and versions. The fourth draft is a scheme for allowing a client to actually ask to select which version of a schema they want to use. So a server can advertise and say, hey, I support version 1 and version 2 of my schema. And the client could actually say, well, I want to stick with my good old version 1. I don't want to have to move to your version 2. And then finally, the fifth draft here is what we feel is going to be some fairly important tooling that's going to need to go around some of this versioning work to help users of modules understand the significance of changes that occur in a module. Next slide. So the next 4 slides are just a little bit more detail, just to remind everybody kind of the main points we're dealing with in the first 2 drafts here. So these are kind of our main 2 drafts. They specify the bulk of the versioning changes, the basics of the versioning changes. Not really intended to have much discussion here. It's just to remind people kind of what are the main parts of these 2 drafts. So this first slide shows that one of the first things we've done is, if you look over in the revision history, whoops, a lot of yellow highlight happened, but we've added this rev non-backwards compatible tag into the revision history. And so you can look at the revision history of a module and see back in the lineage of that module, where a non-backwards compatible change may have occurred since a previous version. Okay, so that's the first important part, is that non-backwards compatible tag done as an extension. Next slide, please. Another interesting part of the first 2 drafts is we're adding a bit of evolution to how import is done by version. So today in 7950, there's some problematic aspects to how import is done by version. It's only an exact version, which has a lot of problems in real life. So we've added a new import by revision or derived, which is basically saying, this module can import the example module, and it can be any version 3.0.0 or any descendant of that version. So you're kind of saying, I want at least this version of that module to be imported. Next slide. So kind of the third thing I'm going to point out here out of the 4 items. The next thing that's fairly significant is we're adding a new, what we call the Yang Semver revision label. So you can see down here in the first green line, the Rev revision label 3.1.0. So we're proposing that Yang module should all have a Semver-like revision label. So you can get an idea of whether there's been major, minor editorial changes since previous versions, etc. One thing to note in the bottom right corner, we do have this kind of, it's optional to use depending on the author and what they're doing with their modules, but we have added kind of a compatibility extension to Semver where you can add a non-compatible tag to the end. In this presentation, I wasn't planning on getting into explaining how that works. I would encourage you to take a look at the draft. There's a fair bit of detail in the latest draft on how that non-compatible tag works. And then finally, the last bit of kind of just review here on the next slide is, again, this is an optional part, but if you're going to be using Yang Semver as kind of your identifier for a unique version of a module, we've kind of specified a file name recommendation with a hash and then the Semver at the end. So that's just a recap of kind of the bulk of the concepts that are in the first 2 drafts that we're really focused on right now. I'll maybe pause there. I don't want to spend too much time reviewing what these are, but we could probably do a couple of questions if there's something related to these slides so far.
This
I
is
think
Kent.
is it. Yep.
Yes, and since I'm also driving the slides, I'll just quickly go back to the one the second item you mentioned. Sorry, here. You said
Yep.
Import by revision or derived. What happens if the derived version actually breaks backwards compatibility?
So the quick answer is there was quite a bit of debate over that, and we were looking at one point about having 2 different extensions. One was revision or derived, and one was revision or derived compatible. But in the end, we decided to kind of keep it simple, and we think the majority of the realistic use cases don't require a derived or compatible. But that is something that could be raised. I guess the feeling was that if you say derived or compatible, it's going to add some of the same limitations as we have where authors may be tempted to use derived or compatible when changes to a module that's getting included, even though there's NBC changes in that module, there's going to be a lot of times they won't affect the modules that are importing that module. And also, if we say derived or compatible, we'll be forced to go back and update all the importing modules that use that if we ever do issue a version of the imported module with an NBC change, even if that NBC change doesn't affect any of the importing modules.
Take this offline, but it's been discussed, so that's the main thing.
Yeah, it was discussed. Not to say we can't reopen that and revisit in more detail, but it was definitely discussed, and it was a conscious decision to just kind of keep it simple, and we think from a practical point of view, it will be good enough. It will certainly solve a lot of the main problems with the inclusion today. Okay, next slide. So we're having weekly calls, and we send out minutes of those to the Netmod group along with how to join the call. We have a fairly the call happens pretty much every week. Definitely open to anyone who wants to join. We do have regular participation from a set of probably 5 to 7 people across 5 different companies. Right now, it's mostly equipment vendors. There is some participation from operators. So I know like Tom Hill's joined from BT a number of times, and a few others, but it would be really good to get more users of modules and operators to participate in those calls. We do try to bring all the key issues back to the workgroup mailing list as requested. So certainly the weekly minutes are there, and then we try to kind of summarize any key issues that we close back on the working group list. And we're definitely focused on the module versioning in the Yang Semver drafts, which were the first 2 in that list. And those are getting pretty close to complete at this point. So most of the issues have been closed. We've made decisions on how to move forward on a lot of those. Next slide. So this is one of the kind of big main issues for the versioning work. And what I want to do is I want to just put this in people's minds, but we're going to come back and discuss this at the end of our time. So because this could just chew up the whole rest of our 30 minutes. And just want to have people to have this in mind when we go through the next 2 updates on the first 2 drafts. So we did adopt this work in Netmod. There's definitely agreement that we have a real problem with Yang, both in vendor modules especially, but even in standardized modules that need some additional evolution in how we manage versioning for Yang modules. So we did adopt the work, but definitely a question has kind of reared its head a few times and has come up again, and that is, should we adopt these drafts, bring them right to RFC as updates and extensions of Yang 1.1? Alternatively, should this be part of Yang Next? Is this too significant and needs to be part of a new language version, Yang 2.0, along with dozens of potential other improvements we're discussing for Yang 2.0, or actually maybe not so much, not discussing at the moment, but we'll be discussing. So option B would be a fairly long road to getting any of these evolutions. Another alternative might be have the versioning drafts constitute the only changes of a Yang 1.2. So these are a few options we could consider. The versioning call group is proposing that this should be an extension to Yang 1.1. I know we don't have consensus for that necessarily across the working group at the moment, but we are really proposing that this work is worthwhile to add to 1.1 without waiting for a Yang Next or having to spin to a Yang 1.2. There is an urgent need in the industry with Yang 1.1. People are doing NBC changes to Yang modules. Vendors certainly, even within the IETF, there's a number of cases where we've had NBC changes. The L3SM module, some IANA modules have had, for example, some AFI-SAFI changes were done in a non-backwards compatible way, and we have no way of showing or describing that today. And import revision is not really practical using the current mechanism. So keep this in mind, and we're going to come back to this one for discussion after the other 2 presentations. Okay.
Let's make sure we come back to this because, as you say, it's an important point. And
yep.
for me, and I can't speak for my co-chairs, I thought we had already settled on A, so I'm a little surprised to see this come up again.
Okay. Yeah, let's come back to that. Is there one more slide? Okay, so next steps. We're tracking everything in GitHub with the link here so you can see the issues, the detailed issue discussions, and we bring anything important back to the working group mailing list. And our next steps is we're trying to wrap up these first two drafts, get them baselined, probably go to working group last call on them, and then hold them. And then we're going to move on to packages and try to start more focused work on that shortly after IETF 111. Okay, that's it for the overview. The next presentation I'll also be presenting is focused on the module versioning draft. Okay, this is Yang module versioning. It was the first draft in that list of 5 I presented in the overview. And this is definitely some of the kind of the baseline work for the versioning, for the rest of the versioning drafts. Go on to the next slide. Okay, so first I'll give a summary of some significant things that have happened since IETF 110. So one of the first changes is there was a lot of debate and discussion around what we should do for state data, for non-config data. But after discussion, including a number of people in the working group, it made sense to keep specific rules for non-config nodes out of scope of this work. So basically, we had started going down the path of providing a number of different rules for state, which was a bit different from the RFC 7950 approach, which kind of has just a set of common rules. And we decided we're going to just leave it like 7950 as far as the difference between config and state. It's just a single set of rules, and this, having something very specific and different rules for state is something that we'd proposed should be tackled in Yang next. The second, actually, I'll pause there in case there's a question about that first one. I don't think I'm seeing something. Next is, so the next change, number 2, we did some clarification of when a new revision label is needed. Basically, there were some subtleties here, but since any published revision of a module is given a new revision date, it also means that if you're using a revision label, then any published revision would get a new revision label. And we, at last IETF, we kind of confirmed and on the mailing list that this applies even for an update that has purely formatting or white space changes. So if you as an author want to publish and make available kind of a cleaned up version of your module that just fixes white spaces and formatting, etc., you can do that, but it needs a new revision date. It needs a new label so you can clearly identify, well, which version of the module you're talking about. So it kind of means that the revision label effectively represents the file version, not necessarily just the schema. So, if you add comments, if you change white space, it is going to be a new revision label. So that was actually confirmed at IETF 110, but we've got we folded that into the drafts now. Any questions about the items on this first slide? Okay, I'm gonna move on to the next one. Okay, a few more updates. Yeah, so the third item here is, what is the impact of changing an extension statement in your draft? So if you're using some Yang extension and you change the extension, not the definition of the extension, but you change the your use of the extension statement, it's not necessarily clear whether that's backwards compatible or non-backwards compatible. So what we said in the draft was, when an author of a new extension creates their extension and defines it, they should specify the impact of adding or removing or changing statements defined by that extension. So we're recommending that is part of defining a new extension is being clear about the backwards compatibility of changes when you use that extension. So we put some text in the draft around that. The item number 4 here was we renamed NBC changes just to be a bit more explicit. This was based on some feedback from the SEMVer community to say non-backwards compatible. So it's fairly minor, but hopefully will help with clarity. And then the 5th item here is, well, we kind of had a mix of using the terms module and submodules in the draft, so we did a bit of cleanup there to make sure that the right terms are used where appropriate. So some places just mention modules, some places mention modules or submodules as appropriate in the draft. Next slide. Actually, I apologize. I'll pause there. Any questions on the items on this slide? Okay, we'll go to the next slide. And then this is the last change. Again, this decision was made at IETF 110, and on the list shortly after. But we just clarified that when the non-backwards compatible extension can be added. So basically, it must be added if there's a known NBC change. And a revision that only contains backwards compatibles shouldn't include it, but there are cases where an author is free to add it if they believe a change could negatively impact clients, even though strictly by the rules defined in the RFC, in our drafts, and maybe tools might say it's identical, but an author may know that actually there's a change there that may impact backwards compatibility, and or a change that isn't clear whether it impacts backwards compatibility, and we'd rather err towards flagging it. So we clarified that as well in the draft. So I think that was the last slide for this deck. Maybe there's a next steps. Open issues. Yeah, so there's no major open issues. The authors want to do one last kind of top-down review, but we expect to do working group last call. The document's ready for that pretty soon. And then I'll hand over to Joe here.
Me. I thought I was speaking. Can you hear me?
Here you go, Joe.
Okay, good. Took a delay, I guess. Well, thank you. Yes. So Jason set me up rather nicely in terms of introduction. So next slide, please. So here we have the the Yang SEMVer draft, and its current status is you may have, if you were at 110, you know that we talked about coming up with text to describe a pre-release precedence. That is, I'll talk about it. I have a slide after this on that. But we'll dig a little bit more into that. We also clarified when a major or minor digit should versus must be incremented. This was documented in issue 78 on GitHub. We wanted to recognize the fact that some module authors may want to increment the major version number when in fact, just backwards compatible changes had been put in, only backwards compatible changes for various reasons, like there was some implementation changes and they wanted to stress that more attention should be paid. So we added some text, some clarity around that as well. One of the funnier things that came up that was brought to our attention by a member of the SEMVer community was that SEMVer 2.0.0, which we've been pontificating about for so long, was in fact changing. And over the past 5 or so years, changed in a number of even normative ways without changing the 2.0.0 version. So it should have probably gone to 2.1.0 at some point based on the changes they made, maybe even a 3.0. But what I did was I went back and found kind of where we had, the authors had, and what we had discussed with the working group, where we kind of landed on a stable revision of that. And the XREF now, as you'll see, we statically reference that in their GitHub or in their Git repository. And we also recognize that when reading through the text, Yang Simver, this draft introduces this terminology artifact, because we also can use Yang Simver to apply to the packages, the Yang packages, which we haven't talked about in a while, but that's still part of this work. But when we were talking about modules in the Yang Simver draft, we only mentioned modules, and it really, in many ways, applied to both module and or submodule. So we adjusted the text there to also mention submodule where appropriate. Now, the last bullet there is actually a lie at this point. Today, the group of contributors went through the open issues on GitHub, and we did find some, as we get close to that finish line, we did find some issues that we wanted to tag with respect to Yang Simver and go back and revisit. Some of them have been fixed since in our GitHub repository, but the version that has been submitted to the working group currently for review doesn't have them. So there are still a few issues that we want to get to, so that's not all of them are closed, but the link that Jason shared for the GitHub issue list will show you what is currently now open for Simver. Next slide, please. All right, so pre-release precedence. Just to remind you what pre-release precedence is talking about, we had this issue where a module might go from 1.0.0, then the initial vision was that there will be a 2.0. We're going to make some non-backwards compatible changes in this. So we're going to, the first pre-release version will be called 2.0.0 pre-release. Then as the team or author working on that module, as they put the work in, they decided, you know what? This isn't really going to be a 2.0. We're not going to make those non-backwards compatible changes. Instead, we're going to add some features. So it's going to be a minor increment of the version. So it'll be a 1.1.0 ultimately. Well, that's all well and good, but if someone is tracking the pre-release version, what they see is 2.0.0 pre-release becomes 1.1.0 pre-release, and there's some confusion as to which of those is technically greater. So the clarity that we added in the document, the two salient points are there on the subsequent bullets. Authors should maintain only one revision statement in a pre-release module that reflects the latest revision. This is because you can take either one of those pre-release versions, 2.0.0 pre-release or 1.1.0 pre-release, and you can easily compare that back to 1.0.0, the last ratified or quote-unquote released version of the module. And you can say that 1.1.0 is not only greater, but you understand from the Simver rules that there's only additional changes, or there's additions made to it. Whereas 2.0.0 pre-release, you may suspect there might be non-backwards compatible changes in there. The second salient point there is with respect to IETF modules, the IETF authors may choose to use the appendix in the associated draft to track those overall changes. So while the pre-release module just has the current pre-release revision, the authors can do like they're doing now and use the appendix to track those changes. I don't see them in the queue, so next slide, please, Kent. Yes, the irony is dripping. So what we did was we went back and looked at GitHub and looked at where kind of the changes that had come in, and instead of we picked up essentially all of the changes, because all of them were relative to where we really started talking, or the changes that happened after that, that we started talking about Simver or really honing in on the Simver 2.0.0 spec. They were just readability. They were editorial changes at that point. But knowing that they've changed in kind of substantial ways over the past 5 years means that they could, in the future, continue to change. So in order to avoid that in the future, we're now the XREF anchor, the target, changed to that June 19th, 2020 revision of the spec. So if the spec changes, that's fine. We could choose, I guess, to look at newer ones, but for purposes of this draft and this document, we're anchored to the June 19th, 2020 revision. Next slide, please. So our next steps, we want to do, as I mentioned, initially when I wrote the deck, that bolded bullet point on that second slide was true. Now we have other issues to kind of address and iron in. So we still want that final top-down review from all of the authors. And then we would like to, as Jason mentioned, we would like to start getting some more working group eyes on this. So if the desire, even if it's not to go forward yet, to conduct a working group last call for this in module versioning, we think might be a good way to force those eyes to look at this so we can get that additional feedback that we want on this in module versioning. And that is the deck. So I will now definitely pause for questions. Now I really got to wonder if I was just talking to myself the whole time or if people actually heard me.
Check, heard you.
Okay.
Yeah, you sound good.
Thanks, Joel. So Jason, do you want to take back up the point that we wanted to come back to?
Yeah, I see Kent had his hand up for a second there, but yeah, let's go back to the first deck.
Yeah, it was exactly that. I was just going to say we should do that. I'll try to bring it up.
I guess in the meantime, people can start addressing it. It's the question of, do we want to bring this work in and make it part of Yang 1.1, or is there are people concerned there's a need to defer it? As a reminder, the working group, the weekly call group, which has a at least representation across 5 different organizations, are pretty unanimous in feeling that we should make this part of Yang 1.1. It's without it, we do have in the industry people making NBC changes to modules, and there's no way to indicate that towards users. So it's something that's already happening, and this at least allows authors to tell users that it's occurring.
I'd like to ask that we hear from people who object to path A, which, as you said, the authors and the group that's been working this are recommending. And we have a couple of people in queue. Well, Kent was or was not, but Rashad?
Sorry, yeah, just quickly, you said you only want to hear from people that object, but I was going to say...
Well, I guess it's the day for chairs having problems with mics. We heard the beginning part of what you said, Kent. I guess I should say I particularly want to hear from those who oppose, but if you want to support, that's fine as well.
Yeah, I'll try again. Just quickly, I'd see no downside in that when we do Yang next, and if it breaks backwards compatibility, it can also break backwards compatibility as needed to adjust for whatever is not going to be done now. Did you want to say something?
Rashad, you are in queue, but muted.
Realize it was my turn. No, I just wanted to mention that one of the reasons why we bring this up again is that there's been some traffic on the alias maybe 2 to 4 weeks ago where this was brought up again. But I believe the people who supported that view or not?
Rashad, I had to kill your mic. There is too much distortion. I could not understand a word you were saying. Mahesh, do you want to say something?
Comment on the question of when and how. I completely support the work. I just wanted to see whatever is the fastest way of getting this work standardized. So if it's 1.1, so be it. Just choose whatever takes fastest. There are other STOs that are kind of watching and waiting for this revision label to be adopted.
I guess I'll go next here. Yeah, I think, in the meantime, I know some vendors are already going ahead and doing similar things on their own. And the OpenConfig group, went ahead with December on their own for some of this. The other thing is I think I can paraphrase what Rashad was saying. I believe he was just pointing out that some of the folks with concerns about including this as part of Yang 1.1, I believe, are not on the call today. So we may be missing some representation from those guys, and it'll be important to, as always, go back to the list on this point.
Yeah, and we'll have opportunities both on the list and particularly when we last call the documents. That'll be a good opportunity to, I'm sure, revisit the issue no matter what the list discussion ends up being.
I see Rashad's hand up, but I think it's left over from before. Does Balazs want to say something?
I want to say that 3GPP is using Yang lately, and they have the habit to update their models in an MVC way. So we absolutely need this yesterday for 3GPP.
Okay. And Rob, did you want to say something?
Yes, as a contributor, I just got a process question on the next steps effectively. So these documents are pretty much done. The authors want to have a sort of last review of these. A couple of comments and questions have come up, issues have come up during the chats and things, so we need to check those. So my question is, can we then do a working group last call of these documents and then hold them while we work on the other ones, or what state do we put these documents in? Do they just sit for a long time without doing a review now? What do the chairs prefer?
So I thought Lou.
For either one of us can say the same thing. We think proceeding with last call as they are ready makes sense, and that holding them until we can submit to ISG as a group is also makes sense. I think we could probably have some debate. This is Lou speaking, not for the others. That we probably have some debate whether we submit the first 4 or first 5. There's a little bit of a gray area on that, but certainly we can start the last call process as soon as the authors think it's ready.
Okay, thanks for confirming.
Moving on to the next presentation, we actually only have about 11 minutes left. I think that's what Kent is asking to do. So I think we're on to our last presenter. Thanks for a good discussion.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes. If you could speak a little bit louder, though, that'd be better.
Okay, fine. This is hello everyone. This is Qiufang Ma, and so on behalf of the authors, I'm here to present the system configuration that handled behavior. And this work has just been moved from the NetConf working group based on chair's suggestion. Next slide, please. To give a recap here, the motivation of this work is that before the NMDA is introduced, system configurations can be located anywhere, and there is no standard system configuration that handles behavior. Then after we introduce the NMDA, it defines that the system configurations should be present in the operational. But the issue is that when the operators want to reference the system configuration, and here by reference, I mean the leaf reference or the system configuration is in the one or master statement, etc. So the reference that item must be copied into running to make sure successful validation, which seems inconvenient. If the system configurations get updated, there is no way to detect and synchronize the update into running. Besides, some system configurations are predefined by the manufacturer as a convenience, but the operators still need to define them in running repeatedly in this case. So our goal here is try to resolve the issue and define a standard system configuration that handles behavior. So here we introduce a system configuration data store, which is config true and read only to hold all the system configurations. And our initial proposal was to define two system configuration modes. One will update running with system automatically when the device is powered on or the physical resource is present, and the other will not do the autocopy operation for the device. Next slide, please. So document status. This draft was first presented in the IETF 110 NetConf session and has also been discussed on the list recently. So thank you everyone for your valuable comments and suggestions. Some high-level updates since the last meeting. We removed the system configuration that handle data retrieval behavior definition for now, and in order not to cause any confusion and misunderstanding with defaults mechanism, we change our terminology of system configuration data modes. Just change the report all to auto-populate and explicit to non-populate. And we also consider the factory default RFC to work with this draft. Next slide, please. So when we have a system data store, is there any alternatives to our proposal? There are some discussion about which data store should system be merged into. I think we have three options. Option one is being merged into operational to keep with MDA RFC. But as Kent and I discussed on the list, we think that for some system-defined templates in system, this option cannot go through the template expansion. And if the operators reference the system configurations, it will not pass the validation due to missing references. So the option two is to be merged into intended and further into operational so that the system defined templates can be expanded and present in the intended. And this also enables intended to pass validation. But please note that the running itself here cannot be valid. So option three is to merge maybe part of the system into running to make sure successful validation, and unreferenced system configuration may also be merged into operational directly. But to compare the option 2 and option 3, should running be valid here? Actually, we find something which seems a little confusing in MDA. That is, MDA defines that it is intended, which is subject to validation. But it also says running must also be a valid configuration data tree. So the question is there, should the running be valid here to hold the referenced system configurations? So my understanding here is that the the validation in run intended just means the configuration transformation to perform from running to intended, but running still need to be valid. That means to satisfy the young module constraints defined in RFC 7915. But this is just my individual opinion. So any comments on that on this slide before we move to the next?
I see Jason starting in the queue.
Yep. A couple of issues. So I guess first of all, a question about option 3. In option 3, if we merge into the running, are you proposing that all of the system config, whether it's referenced or not, like everything in your system configuration becomes part of running, and then a get config of running, you would see all of that system configuration as well?
Yes, I think this question is what I prepared to present on the next slide. This is further, this is open, still open, and need further discussion with the working group, I think.
Okay, and then my next comment is, I recognize the issue you're hitting here about should running be valid, because I think we also have a problem at some point we'll need to tackle, and that is with the intended data store. The intention there is to have, for example, template expansion done between running and intended, and that we haven't standardized that yet. But I'm also a bit uncertain about how running can be valid in the presence of template expansion, because template expansion can, for example, populate some mandatory fields. So I'm also struggling, and it may be relevant to your draft as well, as there's a number of transformations that can happen between running and intended. Does that mean running is not valid? But we may want to discuss it with template expansion as well in mind. So this seems like the same problem.
Yeah, I had the same comment, and I think Rob, did you want to say something next?
Yes, please. So I'll make a few comments actually. First of all, to say thank you for bringing this work. I think this is useful, both in the approach here and also trying to resolve this issue. To answer the one about running being valid, that was always a slight quirk or strangeness of the NMDA architecture. I think we were trying to avoid changing the definition in RFC 7950. And my interpretation of it effectively is that whenever you update running, you update intended at the same time, and you validate intended, and effectively running is valid if intended is valid. So it's sort of by implication it gets validated. It doesn't get validated separately. Or another way of thinking about it is logically running is valid if all the template expansion and all that other work is done. So I think the RFC could be clearer, but that's the way it sort of makes sense in my head. In terms of these choices here, I think to me probably option 2 looks to me like the most the best answer here. I would like to try and go back to the original authors to understand why we put system into option 1. So we did that for a reason. I can't remember what the justification was for doing that at the time, why it feeds into there and not higher up. So I think that would be worth seeing if we can figure that out. In terms of the third option, I don't really like system updating running. I'd much prefer that running is only updated by clients. So if you have an explicit RPC to do that, then I don't have any issues, or it's done via an edit configuration. But I wouldn't like system changes to automatically update running. I don't think that's the right solution.
Okay, thanks. So next slide, please. Any comments still on this?
Yeah, there's still a couple people in queue, and we are running out of time, so try to keep your comments brief. And I'm sorry, Chifang, this discussion is probably the most important takeaway from this conversation, for this presentation. Is one best thing. Balaj, did you want to say
Yes,
something?
I agree.
We are planning systems which don't have a separate intent and data store. I think that's a valid case. And in that case, option 2 looks very strange.
We need to understand better off list, Blaj, you can make a comment to the email about that. That'd be great. Jason?
Yeah, I don't have the solution either, but the other thing to keep in mind with two, Rob mentioned that if intended is valid, then we consider running valid, but that breaks offline validation. So if you grab the running and try up on your client to validate against your Yang model, you can't validate that unless you know all the rules the server uses to expand from running to intended. So that gets tricky.
All right, let's do the next slide.
Okay, so the next slide. So if we can reach an agreement that the referenced system configurations need to be present in running to enable the running be valid, then I think it would be necessary to discuss the mechanism to populate the system into running. And still, I think we have three options. The option one is to copy the system into running automatically when there is any updates in system, but I also know that there are some concerns that the behavior may violate the definition of running, since the running should be totally controlled and driven by the operators. So I'm also wondering whether it's good to define a RFC option to copy the entire system into running. So in this way, it's totally driven by the operators who perform the RPC. And it could be fewer shots, if not one shot, because you just copy the entire system rather than item by item. But both auto-populate and this way will cause some unnecessary system configurations exist in running. So the third option is just the existing mechanism, like edit config operation to redefine the reference system configuration in running if there are too many concerns in working group. But I still think that if the system configuration is meant to be a convenience pre-definition, it does not seem very reasonable enough to have the operators define repeatedly in running. Just want to make it easier for the operators. Yeah, but
I'm sorry, we're very much out of time right now, so if you just wrap it up, please.
Okay, yeah. So follow up. I think we the more examples about system configurations will be worked on and reflected on the next version of the draft. I still want to ask for more comments and suggestions about this work. Yes, so still contributions and co-authors are welcome. Yeah, thank you.
You want to wrap it up for us? Or Jason's in queue. Okay, we're past time limit, but go ahead, Jason. I think I'm still
I
here.
know we're back quickly. I'd recommend we set up a dedicated discussion, a little mini virtual interim for this topic. I think it's got lots of interest and it would benefit from some live back and forth
Yeah, I agree.
proposal.
Yeah, okay, good. All right, well, with that, I thank everyone for their participation and a lot of interesting discussion, things to take off list and maybe even into virtual interims. And with that, I will, unless my co-chairs have anything they want to say, we'll end the session.
Thank you all, and hope to see you in person someday soon.
Yep, you're good. Thank you.
All right.